Welcome to How to Think in English Without Translating English Unfolded UK podcast. I want to talk about something today that almost every language learner has experienced, but very few people actually talk about directly.
Go on then.
That moment when you are speaking English and you realise you are not actually speaking English. You are speaking your first language inside your head and then translating it into English in real time.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It is like there is a tiny interpreter living in your brain, and everything has to go through them first.
Exactly. And the problem is that interpreter is slow, and they make mistakes. And by the time they have finished, the conversation has moved on.
So how do you get rid of the interpreter?
That is the question. And the honest answer is that you do not get rid of them immediately. It takes time. But there are things you can do to speed up the process significantly.
Let us start at the beginning. Why do we translate in the first place?
Because that is how most of us learned. We learned English through our first language. The teacher explained things in our first language. The textbook had translations. We learnt the word for apple by seeing the word in our own language next to the English word. So from the very beginning, English was connected to our first language rather than connected directly to the world.
So the connection goes real thing, then first language word, then English word.
Exactly. 3 steps instead of 2. And fluency is essentially about cutting out that middle step. Getting to a point where you see an apple and the word apple comes directly, no detour through your first language.
How long does that take?
It varies enormously. But the research suggests that the single most important factor is not how much you study. It is how much you use the language in real, meaningful contexts. People who immerse themselves, who watch, listen, speak and think in English as much as possible, tend to make that shift much faster than people who study grammar rules.
Because immersion forces the brain to make direct connections.
Exactly. When you are watching an English film and something funny happens and you laugh before you have consciously translated anything, that is a direct connection. Your brain processed the English and responded to it without any middleman.
I love that moment, when you realise you understood something without trying.
It is a genuine milestone, and it happens more and more as you progress. But you can also actively encourage it.
How?
The first thing is to start labelling your world in English, not formally, just mentally. When you pick up your coffee cup in the morning, think coffee cup. When you look out of the window, think grey sky or sunny morning. When you sit down at your desk, think desk, chair, screen. You are building direct connections between English words and the actual things around you, bypassing your first language entirely.
That sounds almost too simple.
It is simple. But simple is not the same as easy or unimportant. The reason it works is that you are training your brain to use English as a primary code rather than a translation layer. And you can do it anywhere. On the bus, in the supermarket, walking to work. It costs you nothing and takes no extra time.
What else?
The second thing is to start thinking in English rather than thinking in your first language and then translating. When you are about to send a message to a friend, try drafting it in English in your head first, even if you send it in your own language. When you are deciding what to have for lunch, have that internal conversation in English. It does not have to be perfect. The point is to make English the language of your internal voice as often as possible.
I think a lot of learners would find that quite uncomfortable at first.
Very uncomfortable. Because when you think in English, you immediately notice all the gaps the words you do not have, the structures you are not sure about, and that discomfort is exactly what helps you learn. Those gaps become very visible and your brain starts looking for ways to fill them.
So the discomfort is actually a signal that learning is happening.
Always. If it feels easy, you are probably not pushing yourself enough. The sweet spot for language learning is just beyond the edge of what you can comfortably do.
What about when you are in a real conversation and the translation is happening whether you want it to or not?
This is really common and really frustrating. You know what you want to say. You can say it perfectly in your first language. But by the time the translation is complete, the moment has passed. What helps here is to stop waiting for the perfect translation and start working with what you have.
Say what you can rather than what you want to say.
Exactly. If you do not have the precise word, describe it. If you do not have the perfect structure, use a simpler one. The goal of communication is to be understood, not to be perfect. And the more you allow yourself to communicate imperfectly, the faster your English will improve. Because you are getting real feedback in real time from a real conversation.
There is something quite freeing about giving yourself permission to be imperfect.
Very freeing. And it connects to something we talked about in a previous episode, the language ego. The idea that in our first language we have a fully formed sense of who we are. We are witty, articulate, nuanced, and in English we feel like a simplified version of ourselves. That gap is uncomfortable. But the way through it is not to wait until your English is perfect. The way through it is to keep going anyway.
What about people who feel like they have been learning for years and are still translating?
First, this is more common than people think. The shift from translating to thinking in English does not happen on a schedule. It happens unevenly, sometimes in one context before another. You might find you can think in English when you are writing but not when you are speaking. Or you can understand English films directly but still translate when you have to use formal language at work.
So it is not all or nothing.
Not at all. And that is actually encouraging, because it means every area where you stop translating is a genuine achievement. Even if other areas are still lagging behind, the brain is not one thing. Different contexts activate different parts of your language system.
Is there anything specific for people who have been learning for a long time and feel stuck?
Yes. Try changing the context. If you have been learning English mainly through study, textbooks, grammar exercises, classes, try switching to something completely different. Watch a show you love in English. Listen to a podcast on a topic you are genuinely interested in. Join a conversation group. Read a book you would read in your own language.
Because engagement drives acquisition.
Nothing drives language acquisition like genuine interest and genuine need. If you are genuinely curious about what happens next in a story, your brain will work much harder to understand it than if you are reading a grammar exercise.
Which is why what English Unfolded UK is trying to do matters. Real stories, real conversations, real language in real contexts.
Exactly. The goal is not to teach English. The goal is to give you enough real English that your brain starts to acquire it naturally, the way children do through exposure and use, rather than through explanation and translation.
So our question for today, do you still translate when you use English, or have you started to think directly in English? In what situations does it happen most naturally for you?
We would love to know. Leave a comment on our YouTube channel.
Thank you for listening to English Unfolded UK. Keep learning. Keep growing.
Bye.